Today on Science with Impact.
My mind was absolutely blown. I was like, this is exactly what I've been looking for. People actually thinking about how we teach and reflecting on it and gathering data, because there has to be a better way. I was so anxious and so stressed that the grad office sent me off to UCLA's campus. The therapist ultimately asked me why it bothered me so much that the professor was teaching so poorly. And I remember sitting there going, well, because it should be better. I can do better. I want to do better. I care about teaching. Finding a career that lets me live the life I want to lead instead of having a career that is my life. Hi, my name is Morgan Howe. I am an institutional researcher at Cal State Channel Islands. I am jointly hired by their DEI office and their institutional research office. I have a background in chemistry and then chemistry education research, and then headed this direction. I'm also a ballet dancer and I like chocolate.
I loved that.
It's made me a lot of friends on campus since I'm new there.
Tell me more about your love for chocolate.
No, I can tell you more than you will probably want to know about chocolate, but that's probably a different podcast.
What's one of your favorite facts about chocolate?
That it has different crystal structures. You have to heat it up so that the correct one is the one that reforms, that makes chocolate actually like snap.
Oh, I didn't know about that. That's so cool.
Right? All of these different crystal forms.
That's beyond cool.
Yeah.
Today we're talking about academic or alternative academic careers. And the question I have for you is, which specific decision points or events in your life led you to this current academic career?
Like a lot of people, there's a few events that were decision points, and then there's a few things that were just chance, which always bothered me when people would tell me stories like that as I was listening to things like this. The first kind of turning point, because originally I started wanting to do a career in chemistry. I got my undergrad degree in chemistry. I went to grad school for chemistry with the intent of coming out and presumably doing something with chemistry. I very rapidly realized, though, in my first year of grad school, that bench chemistry was not what I wanted to be doing. I was in a graduate level organic synthesis course and was having an awful time. It was being taught so poorly with so little structure and so little guidance. And it was being an absolute nightmare to my organized little brain that was trying to make sense of everything. I was so anxious and so stressed that the grad office sent me off to the office on UCLA's campus. The therapist ultimately asked me why it bothered me so much that the professor was teaching so poorly. And I remember sitting there going, because it should be better. I can do better. I want to do better. I care about teaching. And that was when I realized that it wasn't so much the chemistry and the teaching and learning of chemistry that I was really interested in. I got involved in a lot of teaching stuff during grad school, more than most people in my cohort, at least, were just doing the minimum TA requirements kind of thing. And then in my fourth year, the local ACS chapter, Professor John Pollard, to give a talk at Cal State Los Angeles. And it was about the chemical thinking curriculum. I had no idea what chemistry education research was. I didn't know discipline-based education research was a thing that people did. I went to this talk and my mind was absolutely blown. I was like, this is exactly what I've been looking for. People actually thinking about how we teach and reflecting on it and gathering data, because there has to be a better way than all of us sitting at a blackboard drawing a bunch of arrows at things. So I went and talked to him. He was extraordinarily generous with his time and talked to me about ways I could get involved in the chemistry education community. And so I did. I went on and did a postdoc with Sam Pizzini at UW-Madison. That was where the next kind of shift into equity work came into play. I, by chance, got assigned to help the grad students from the Graduate Student Association at UW-Madison chemistry department run a survey about graduate student experiences, with the goal of understanding why they had so few women postdocs. At the time, there were only 2. I got involved with some really wonderful people like you, Vanessa, who were able to help me really understand the intricacies of what I was doing. I started to really get interested in how I could help advance equity in higher education, specifically in STEM. But ultimately, my time at UW-Madison then showed me the answer to another question, which was that I didn't want to be a faculty member. And so I started applying for all kinds of jobs, just really anything that was outside of faculty work and teaching work, to see what people would let me do with what I know. And that ranged from institutional research to working with educational firms. It was a long process. And ultimately, this is where the luck comes in. I got very lucky and wound up applying and being accepted for this position at Cal State Channel Island to work with their Student Academic Success and Equity Initiatives, SASE department, on a bunch of equity grants, and then also jointly work with their institutional research or IR department. So yeah, that's my story. That's how I wound up where I am.
Thank you for outlining that.
Sure.
So, in the beginning, you mentioned something really insightful about how there are decisions and then there are circumstances or chances that happen. And it used to frustrate you.
Both. It bothered me because I wanted to have control over that process. I'm like, but if I want to get from A to B, how do I have control over that complete process? And people would always talk about, oh, I had this chance meeting. I was lucky enough to go to this talk. I was lucky enough, in my case, to apply for this position where it turned out the team is working on really critically informed DEI work. And my question as somebody listening to these kinds of talks was always like, okay, but how do I find that on purpose? And I think in retrospect, my answer is that you don't find that on purpose, but you find something on purpose. That your happenstance will happen, and you can make a happenstance happen. You just might not know what it's going to be.
You got to dig into that more.
Yeah, absolutely. I flatter myself that one of the things that I'm really good at is just inserting myself into conversations when I'm in networking spaces. It's not something I do naturally. Like, I don't enjoy just going up to strangers and starting conversations with them. But when I am at conferences, when I am at talks, when I go and talk to as many people as I can. I will go through lists of conference attendees before I go to them and identify, okay, here are all of the people working outside of academia. I want to go talk to at least 2 of them today and tell them who I am and what I'm looking for and ask if they have any suggestions. I'll come with lists of questions prepared and that kind of thing. And I didn't know what opportunity was going to be sent my way, but I set myself up to find those opportunities where they existed. I didn't know what happenstance it was going to be, but I made sure that I was present for as many happenstances as I could.
That's interesting because it seems to be that there's decisions, happenstances, and then there's also an element of like your wiring because you were in organic synthesis and just feeling so frustrated that it wasn't being taught well. So, can you walk me through a little bit what it was that made you so upset about that? What was it that was so clear to you that it was being taught poorly that you could do better and that you wanted to fix?
That's a good question. And this was also something that would always bother me when people would talk about their careers and talk about their passion, or there's something like they're really passionate about. And I was like, I don't know, liking chocolate? Question mark? What do you mean passionate? And it ended up being, it was something that kept sticking with me of I could have let it go. I could have just sat there and gone, oh, wow, this professor is really terrible. I just got to get through this class and move on. But it was the sense of injustice of it to me of, but that's not fair. You should be doing this. And I think that's one of the key identifiers for me is it's something where I sit there thinking this should, or if I were doing it, I would. And identifying where I have ideas for things and where I see places that I think change should happen. And that I think is a more helpful description to me than passion. because it identifies a specific train of thought, an actual, like, when I am thinking this about a topic, it means it's something I care about. When I am thinking about students shouldn't have to deal with teachers who don't care how their students are feeling and don't care what's going on in their lives, that's telling me that I care about.
Yeah. I love that because I've heard so much in the spaces where people who have businesses dwell about how should and would is such a weakness. There's a lot of framing around the idea of I should do this, I would do this, but it's more from the position of I should do X work that needs to get done to advance the business. What you're saying is more of the power of a should and would to direct you to what your passions and ideas are. That you're thinking it should be done this way. So it's not I should, it's more of it should be like this. It could be like this. It would be like this if I did it. And I think that's really insightful and a very cool twist on the whole like shoulda, woulda, coulda thing is being a bad thing, whereas this is more of a asset. Very
Yeah, I
cool.
hadn't definitely flipping that on its head.
I love that. So when you met with John Tallard, is that right?
Pollard.
What was it about that conversation that you found the most helpful?
He helped me identify conferences and big journals where people interacted with each other. Because from the inside, it's really obvious. You go, oh, of course everybody goes to BCCE, the Biennial Conference in Chemical Education or Chemistry Education, whichever it is. Or of course everybody goes to the Gordon Research Conference. What do you Google to find that out? How do you even search for that? And if you don't have a specific mentor like me, you don't have any way to find that out. And so he gave me just those little keys to here are the places you should be looking. Here are a couple of journals you can look at to learn who big names are. Here are a couple of conferences you can think about applying to and going to so that you can start to meet the right people.
That's so helpful. And I think it's so funny how everyone in Deber has their story of this is when I learned this thing existed because almost
I
none of
know,
us
right?
sort of like I knew before grad school that I wanted to do discipline-based education research as a doctorate and I wanted to do it in chemistry. I when I introduce myself now, I'll usually just stick to like I'm a chemist or I'm a consultant and I just choose it based on what I think people will react to. And so often they ask more. If I say I'm a consultant, they want to know more. If I say I'm a chemist, they're like, I hated that. Yeah.
Also part of why I got into education was that I would tell people I was in graduate school for organic chemistry and they would come back with, oh, I had the worst teacher. And again, it was like, we can do better than worst.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I agree with you so strongly on that. When I tell them consultant, they'll ask questions. And so I'll go further. And I'll go, okay, I consult NSF-funded scientists on how to translate their science research into broader impacts in education. And they're like, oh, so you're like a teacher. I was like, yeah, but also a chemist, but also a researcher and a statistician and a consultant. And they're just like, you can't do all this. It's funny because Deber is inherently at an intersection between a discipline like chemistry and then education research. So it's just such a fun thing
Yeah.
to then tack on more spokes to that wheel.
Oh, absolutely. That intersection is actually something that I've been finding as I go into other spaces. It's really unique about us. And
Yeah.
it's something that's really valuable if you can figure out how to communicate it to people that this is something you have and this is something you can bring. It
Me
is an
too.
incredibly valuable trait.
It really is. Having all of those skill sets serves us so well. I remember being frustrated sometimes in grad school because while my counterparts were studying one specific thing, I had to study 9 things and become expert level at as many of them as I could within reason. And I wouldn't say that I mastered any of those, but it's just funny that we're expected to do it. And at first it's hard, but then it becomes our greatest asset in our career. So then you mentioned you found a community where you grew to learn about the intricacies of equity work. So could you tell me about what are some of those intricacies that you learned?
The first thing I had to do was learn about myself. I had a lot of growing and learning to do. My position equity work, uh, that I didn't strongly identify with any of my identity and didn't understand how education could be a gendered or racialized or insert an identity here experience. And starting to learn that my particular project at the time was about women's careers in chemistry, so I tend to default to thinking about gender. But thinking about gender equity in chemistry doesn't just look like the same number of women faculty as men faculty, that it also looks like changing the norms and expectations to reflect values that are more traditionally associated with being a woman and being feminine. Learning how to, like I said, understand my own experiences through those lenses and how me being white affects how I interacted with the world and how being a woman interacts with, or how I see the world, and all of the different pieces of who I am, whether it's neurodivergence or sexuality or whatever, that all of these pieces come into play, no matter how strongly or how openly I associate with any one of them.
Love that. So some of the greatest insights about the intricacies of equity work that you found by exploring your own interaction with the academic system through your identities and through your lenses. I think that's a very natural thing that a lot of us who go through equity work go through. And it's one of the reasons why our work is exhausting, because it's not just showing up for the work and doing the work. It's like you're doing emotional labor while you're also doing the cognitive labor of your job. And you're
Yeah,
trying to change
absolutely.
things that are very hard to change.
Yeah.
But I
Well,
think
and
it's great.
again, to be very clear and to give credit where credit is due, I had a very close circle of friends and scholars who had to challenge me a lot in my early stages of work. And I am eternally grateful to those people for the work that they did, the emotional work that they did, and the emotional work they prompted me to do to get me to that point. You have to engage with that to be able to do DEI work well, I think.
So later you decided you didn't want to be a faculty member. Could you describe to me why not?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, that came down to the fact that I wanted a career that was part of my life, not a career that was my life. And that weirdly was also part of the process of doing equity work and thinking about my identities and thinking about how I define myself, because I realized that I have a lot of other identities beside chemist or researcher, and I was also having a crisis about that at that point because I had just stepped away from bench chemistry and didn't know whether I could still call myself a chemist, and it was very uncomfortable. But I also am a dancer. I'm a baker. I'm a friend. I am active. I am busy. I like to try new things. And those are all just as important to me as what I accomplish and what I am professionally. And I took a good hard look at what I was seeing and the experiences of people around me who were starting in faculty positions or had been in faculty positions, and decided that wasn't the life I wanted for myself. I wouldn't mind it as a job, I don't think, but it wasn't the life I wanted for myself. And that was really important to me and really scary because we we all get told, not necessarily directly, but we all are given the impression that if you don't go down that path, you've somehow failed or failed the community. Even my PI at the time said things like, "It's such a shame we're losing you." And I'm like, "Nobody's losing me. I'm still here. I'm just putting my skills in a different place. If you want me to stay, let's change some of the expectations so that I can have a life and also do this work you want me to do."
It's such a shame that the system isn't conducive to having a career and having a life.
Yeah,
It's a better way to say it.
also true.
I can relate to a lot of that. It's something that I think a lot of people, at least people who are in our spaces, can resonate with. Or it's One of the reasons why making this kind of alt academic content I think will be really helpful to people, because being able to envision what life looks like postgraduate school that's not being an assistant professor on the tenure track is really hard. It's, of course, our role models are those people. Those are our advisors, and we honor them, we respect them for the most part. And to go against that and to go, hey, I really honor what you've taught me, but I don't want to walk that path. That level of resistance is really hard to live through and to follow through on. And plus, finding the jobs itself was a trek.
It's a rough path. And that's the other thing that you say is like envisioning what life can look like. I did not know, and nobody I knew could tell me what my alternatives were. My advisor didn't have anyone he could send me to learn about what my other options were. So I just started looking at job boards and going, this kind of looks like it. And over time, I learned what search terms I needed to use, that I was looking for things like analyst, that I personally should look for job titles that had the word equity in them, and that I needed to get rid of the finance one because it's not that kind of equity. Ultimately, like there was no support to help me even figure out what this looked like. And I am glad that you're giving me an opportunity to help hopefully share that with a few other people.
For the like 30 people. So I think it'll be really great. And who knows, maybe someday that will grow. And if not, that's okay. We're here for you 30.
Yes.
Oh man. What I really love about that is that it's almost as though going from disciplinary wet science and chemistry to DEBR was an easier transition than going from DEBR to figuring out alt academia. Because going from chemistry research to chemistry education research, it's like you're still on the research path. There's still graduate school. People understand that function. People understand the function of publishing papers, applying for grants, running a research lab, having students to mentor. All of those things are similar in those two realms. But when you go alt academia, it's just a whole nother ballgame. There's this whole other group of skill sets and terminologies. Give me some insight on that last transition that you had to make.
It's like you say, it's about terminology and about being able to communicate to people in this other world what it is that we do. Because, like you said, if I said to somebody in DEBR, hey, I did this and published in this journal and it has X impact factor, I'm in a space now where they go, tell me about a time that you navigated multiple from multiple stakeholders and thought about how to communicate that to people. And at first that sounds very separate from what we do in a research context until you think about, no, we have demands from multiple stakeholders all the time. They're called different projects. And also you have to give a group meeting presentation, and then you have a conference you're preparing for, and you're also TAing, and you have to think about which one of those things is going to happen first. And all it takes is a step back to say, okay, when they're talking about leadership, I can talk about teaching, I can talk about mentoring. When they're talking about team building, you can talk about collaborations that you've done and papers that you've written with other people. When they ask about problem solving, that's literally our entire job as graduate students.
We're about
right?
that life.
I remember sitting there and going, of course I have problem solving skills.
But
my
that's
whole
just
life
has been a problem.
Oh, don't get me started. And that's just it, though, is that inherent to me when I write graduate student, it says all of those things. But in some of these spaces, you actually have to list out, oh, here is what it means to be a graduate student, especially since as someone who did my Ph.D. in chemistry, people who I'm working with now are generally social science majors. They're folks who have been interested in higher education. Their master's and PhD programs look very different to mine. And having to explain to them, here is the kind of thing that I did, here is the kind of balance that I had, the distribution of my work, the types of things that I was asked to do, whether that's I had to organize all of the ordering for my lab. And here is how I kept track of that. And here is the system that I built to make sure that everybody got all of their gloves on time and nobody ran out of solvent. That you have to pick all of that apart. And it really is so important for you to take a moment and think about those keywords that they use in job descriptions of leadership and problem solving and team player and all of those things, and then be very explicit about how that did appear, because I promised you it did. You did all of those things in your graduate career. You just have to spell it out for other people who have.
I've heard that referred to as connecting the dots in these spaces. Yeah, that's insightful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How did this align with the work that you're doing now?
Like I said, the core of my sort of career decisions so far has been about finding a career that lets me live the life I want to lead instead of having a career that is my life. And that has dictated a lot of where I apply to work and the kinds of positions I apply to work for. I am very excited to have a position that does have set hours of 8 to 5, and I get to just put things down after that. And I am extraordinarily lucky to have a supervisor who does not expect me to answer emails after 5 p.m. And I made a joke one time about, somebody sent me an email expecting that I'd be reading my email at 7:30 p.m. And he goes, "Oh, I hope you didn't respond." Like, he was quite serious. But yeah, that more than just the topic of my work, the frame of my work lets me have time to go do ballet in the evenings, to go bake cookies on the weekends and share them with my coworkers when I come in on Monday morning, and have them really confused the first time I did that, but that's okay. And then on a professional level, it's really satisfying because I'm getting to take all of the research skills that I have and use them to improve a community close to home. That was one of the big focuses I had when I was looking for positions. Was I have deep admiration and respect and gratitude for my colleagues who do work and put it out into the publishing sphere. I personally want to work with a community and stay with a community and help it grow. And I actually get to do that now. Like, I'm working on a project where we realized that out of 140, I think, students who had checked the box on their application that said they identified as Indigenous, 9 of them were being reported out as Indigenous, according to the logic of the federally mandated race reporting system. And so we're working on a project to try and change that. The way that we as the university represent our students is really important. And so I get to just look at things that I think are wrong about the way we handle data and the way we treat our students, and then go change them, which is really amazing. I love it. I also am really lucky that I get to work with people who share those kinds of values. The folks in the Student Academic Success and Equity Initiative office are also deeply invested in uplifting and supporting their students and doing work that changes systems rather than changing students, which is a kind of core belief of mine. And so this job lets me take the skills that I have, help a community grow and stay with that community, and then also live a life that I want to live.
I love all that for you.
Thank you
As you were speaking, I thought of 3 questions.
for it.
You mentioned how you wanted to look for a career that lets you live the life that you want to lead, meaning specifically a life outside of your career. What do you think would need to change in academia for people like us to believe that assistant professor could be a role that would allow us to do that?
I think it primarily has to do with the volume of expectations and the criteria for tenure. Because ultimately, right now, and this is admittedly from my own understanding from without that system, because I chose not to go into an assistant professor position, there is not a way to get the amount of teaching and mentoring and grant writing support and all of those things done and being on committees and being a good member of the campus community, there's just not enough hours in the day. No, it's not a simple answer, which is why it hasn't been solved. But that would be one piece, is the volume of expectation. And then the other is that thinking about the criteria for tenure, and this is always been in the back of my mind as I think about gender equity work, is that you can have, generally when we think about tenure, we think about research and we think about teaching and we think about service. And generally, the latter two fall second class to research. If you have a nature paper or a science paper or something like that, you can be a pretty mediocre to bad teacher and mentor and a bad member of the campus community and your department, and it will get excused because you have good enough research to, if you will, make up for it. But the reverse isn't true. If you're a truly outstanding teacher who makes huge changes in your curriculum and supports students and does all kinds of amazing things, but your research is, and maybe you haven't gotten as many papers out, or maybe they go into journals that are of a slightly lower caliber or whatever it is, there is no option for that, for your teaching to make up for that research. And I would love there to be a pathway to tenure that lets authors value a different one of those three things and say that, hey, my research is not the only thing that I do. I am also here to teach students and train the next generation of scientists and that kind of thing. And that those are equally important functions of my position. And therefore, if I'm fulfilling those, that should also be grounds to reach that milestone. Do I think that's going to happen anytime soon? Probably not. If I could wave a magic wand.
I'd like to see you have a wand that you could wave to do cool things.
Oh, that would be fun.
Do you think that the gap between what is research, what is service, and what is teaching and how they're valued could be a reason for overall declining enrollment rates for students in STEM degree programs?
I think it's possible, but I think that's a very complex issue with a lot of contributing factors.
Yes.
Hedging my language.
Uh-huh.
No, because if we have professors who are incentivized, mind you, I'm not trying to place the blame and saying like, how dare they? This is how the system is set up to incentivize people
Right.
to go and get amazing research published at no matter what the cost. They are incentivized to burn out their students. They're incentivized to work them long hours and to not put more professional development into how to be an inclusive mentor. The system that we have very explicitly, in my mind, incentivizes people to not create a welcoming environment for students. However, I do think that there's a lot going on in terms of the financial state of the world and also the social state of the world that contribute to declining enrollment.
You mentioned just recently and in your initial response to the second question about how happy you are that you get to apply your research skills to advance a community that's close to home. And we share a respect for our colleagues who are doing this in the research sphere, but being able to make impacts on your local community has been really fulfilling. And the question that arose in all of that was, do you think that the pressures for prolific academic publishing for grant funding could be a core issue with the career of assistant professor, at least for you specifically?
Do you mean that pressure to publish and produce research is one of the core reasons that I don't want to pursue that?
Right.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's also a lot of factors about professorship that just didn't suit me. Anxiety, that's something that I struggle with. That's something that I am in therapy for. I take medication for. I'm very open about. And it turned out that mixing that with being responsible for teaching a bunch of students was really not good for my health. That was another reason that I found out professorship probably wasn't where I needed to be. I could have done them and done them well. I would have done so at the expense of my own health, and I don't want to do that to myself or to my students or to the people around me who would have had to deal with the fallout. You can have your research focus on particular goals, but ultimately the most important thing ends up having to be your research. I know a great many assistant professors who care deeply about their mentoring and supporting their students, and I don't want to discount that. They do those things without getting rewarded for them often. And they can have those values, but they will not be valued by the university in a similar way.
I have one last question.
Okay.
What are your general perspectives or thoughts about the institutions that are actively closing their DEI offices and initiatives?
I don't know what to say to that. Obviously, some of them are doing that because it's being legislated and they don't really have a choice. There is still space to achieve those goals. It's just going to take more work. I was actually at an institutional research conference a couple of weeks ago and went about anti-DEI legislation and the impacts that has on different universities. They were talking about how you can still have programs that aim to support a diverse population of students. They just have to be framed differently. It's going to take things like, oh, we're going to make a student welcome center or whatever that might focus on things that are most relevant to, for instance, Hispanic and Latinx students. But we don't call it the Latinx Student Center. I think that's harmful because it means we're not allowed to tell students that we explicitly value you for your identity and your whole identity. But it does still mean that we can have that work happen. I think it's unfortunate because it's also going to mean that people who do DEI work, like me, are going to have to worry about actual legislative response, legal response to the choices that they make. I was asking questions in this session about, all right, so maybe I don't call it DEI, but I'm framing my research in a framework that's based in critical theory. Is that ruled out? Am I going to get called on that? DEI isn't just like, oh, we're going to go create a space for people with this identity. It informs which questions you ask and how you ask them and who you ask them to. And drawing that line is going to be really fuzzy. And the take home from that session that I was at was ultimately there's going to be a lot of legal challenges in our near future. We have no idea where all of these laws are going to come down on issues like what I just said. If I have a research question that's based in a critical theory that assumes there is inequity in the world and inequity in higher education and that there is institutional racism or sexism and I just look at these things and it makes me so exhausted thinking about the work that's going to have to happen to make sure that our students are still supported in the ways that they deserve to be supported. And it sucks.
It does suck. It's either the system will drown out those voices and they will reemerge somewhere else where students can get the education and the justice that they need, or they won't. And it will be up to us and the labor that people like us who are willing to put in and all of our colleagues who are putting in to either prevent or curtail that. So it's a heavy thing to end on, but that's where we're
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for your responses and for being kind and honest and open and for talking about mental health and perspectives of your identity and who you are as a person. Because I know in academia, those are not necessarily things that are celebrated. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much for inviting me to chat.